I won the lottery. It was the most random, fortunate thing that could ever happen to anybody. What is now the most famous goal in the history of American hockey. I think it's the biggest load of crap I've ever heard in my life.
You're never going to be perfectly happy all the time. The best you can hope for is to be reasonably happy. Most of the time. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Reasonably Happy. I have a very special guest today. His name is Jim Lampley. He is the author of a new book called It Happened, A Uniquely Lucky Life in Sports, and he would know all about the way it happens in sports because after a 40 or 50 year career in broadcast journalism, Jim has covered almost any sport you can imagine, including college and professional football and basketball, wrist wrestling, log rolling, downhill skiing, NASCAR, IndyCar, 14 Olympic Games, the Super Bowl, Wimbledon, and perhaps most notably, he spent 30 years as the blow-by-blow announcer for HBO World Championship Boxing. He is the winner of multiple Emmys, the Sam Taub Award for Excellence in Boxing Broadcast Journalism, and is a member of the International Boxing Hall of Fame. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Let's go back in time to 1974. Tell me what the gold blazer of ABC Sports meant to the world.
Well, ABC Sports was a significant forward-stepping division in network television at that time. Both other television networks, NBC and CBS, had sports divisions, and they had within them some franchises that were meaningful and identifiable, but ABC Sports, which was seen as the third player and not as meaningful in news, which was seen as the third player and not as meaningful in entertainment.
So CBS was number one in news with Cronkite, right?
CBS was number one in news with Cronkite. NBC had Huntley and Brinkley. ABC was struggling to achieve an identity in news. Pretty much the same situation in entertainment. But ABC had a thoughtful, innovative, and aggressive chief executive of the sports division who recognized the possibility of making that network number one, most meaningful, clearly the world's leader in sports television production. And they wound up achieving that largely by being aggressive with regard to Olympics rights. They made sure that they would get the Olympics more often than the other networks. They signed on early to the American Football League when it was not clear that the AFL would survive and become a meaningful competitor with the National Football League. Ultimately, of course, there was a merger, and it all became the same thing. But the net was that ABC Sports and its identifying symbol, you call it gold, we called it yellow.
Was it yellow?
It was. I think it was yellow.
Okay, yeah, maybe so. Maybe it was the Century 21 blazer that was gold.
Yeah, the Century 21 blazer was definitely deeper and a richer kind of color. Mm-hmm. The ABC blazer was yellow, and in fact, it was made from double knit fabric.
Nice.
It was a spongy, ultra durable double knit fabric for a lot of reasons relative to the sports you were covering and the kinds of stresses it would endure. And we used to have a joke on the staff at ABC that when you went to National Rent-A-Car and rented your Oldsmobile Cutlass for the weekend, if you wanted to, you could put the blazer on the road in front of the Oldsmobile Cutlass and drive over it and back up over it a couple of times, et cetera, and he couldn't do any damage to it. It was virtually indestructible. But I was a 24 going on 25-year-old graduate student at the University of North Carolina in the radio, television, motion pictures department. Not every school had one at that time. UNC was a little bit more advanced in that regard. I had also gone to undergraduate school at University of North Carolina. Chapel Hill was a holy grail to me as a child. And as I went through my last year of studies in my graduate program, ABC Sports, Roone Arledge, had chosen to develop an idea to put a college age or close to college age reporter on the sideline of college football. Now, nobody in broadcasting had ever stood on the sideline of a football game before. And how did it happen? It happened because at the 1972 Olympics in Munich, when 9 Israeli athletes were captured by Black September terrorists, and ABC was struggling to figure out better and more aggressive ways of covering that situation, getting pictures from the Olympic Village room, if possible, getting sound, etc. They discovered that radio frequency cameras and microphones, wireless cameras and microphones, would do things that they didn't know that they would do. They discovered that the signal would go over concrete walls, that it would go through metal barriers, that it would work in ways that no one had foreseen. So after the 72 Olympics, ABC went back to New York. They convened a meeting among the sports, news divisions, along with the engineering division. And the question was, what can we do with this? Now that we know this, what can we do? And one of the ideas that they agreed to immediately was we could put a reporter on the sideline of a football game. Well, it wasn't going to be the NFL. The NFL was already, meaningfully developed, and its leadership was not going to be pushed by television to do something they didn't want to do. They knew that their coaches wouldn't want to see a reporter on the sidelines. But college football was different because through the vehicle of the Chevrolet advertising budget and a New York agency named Dancer Fitzgerald Sample, ABC effectively owned college football. And if ABC wanted to put a reporter on the sideline of college football, they could simply tell the institution of college football, this is happening. And so they went around the country. They interviewed 432 college age or close to college age students. I was close enough to college age. They were going to choose one person. In fact, the way it was presented in the room was, we're going to try to find the face and voice of the American college student. I immediately decided this is absurd. I had driven 8 hours from Chapel Hill to Birmingham, Alabama. It was a 97-degree May day with 100% humidity in Birmingham.
They have those, yeah. I've experienced
you lived in Atlanta, so you know what I'm talking about. And when I finally got into the screening interview with the 3 young minions from ABC Sports who had been sent out onto the road, and a young producer named Terry Jastro smilingly said, what do you think of this idea that we're pursuing? I was so fed up at that moment, I said, I think it's the biggest load of crap I've ever heard in my life. What do you mean by that? Well, the notion that you're going to go around the country and interview more than 400 of us for what appears to be 8 or 10 minutes each, and from that choose the face and voice of the American college student? Come on, you've got to be kidding me. And I feel dishonored and angry that I drove all the way from Chapel Hill to be a part of this. And later I saw the evaluation form on which Roone Arledge's chief administrative assistant, Dick Ebersole, had written, arrogant, abrasive, alienated, antagonistic. And in the college football truck, once I was chosen, that became known as the 4 A's. Anytime I got fractious on the sideline and complained about something, the director, a famous guy named Andy Sedaris, would say, there it is, the 4 A's.
Well, they obviously saw something in you besides being arrogant. Why did they choose you, do you think?
They chose me because even though they had trumpeted from the beginning that this person would be someone who was utterly a novice and had no past broadcasting experience, at the last minute, Roone Arledge got cold feet and asked, was there anybody we interviewed who had a great deal of experience and about whom we know for sure that he's not going to fail in front of a camera or a microphone? And I had done a lot of broadcasting during my graduate school 2 years at UNC. I had done the pregame and postgame football shows on the radio network. I had done the pregame and postgame shows on the basketball on the radio network. I had done a Dean Smith studio show during the week. I had done a great deal of broadcasting at that moment, which is part, I think, of of the reason why they flushed me out after the first round of interviews. And so when Arledge asked the question, his assistant, Dick Ebersol, said, yeah, there's one guy. There is this one person we spoke to who has done a good deal of broadcasting. And Roone said, okay, let me have a look at him. Send him out to do, in those days, we weren't shooting videotape. It was 16 millimeter film.
Oh, wow.
Send him out to do a 16 millimeter film audition and let me see him. And at that moment, they chose, randomly, out of the hat, they chose for me to go interview a particular pro football subject. It was a quarterback named George Mira, who had been drafted in the NFL, played some for the 49ers, busted out of that, gone to the CFL in Canada, played for a few years up there. I think it was the Toronto Argonauts, busted out of that, was now playing in some new ancillary pro football team. He was down to his last crack at an opportunity in pro football. He was playing with the Birmingham Americans of the World Football League, and I was sent to go back to Birmingham to do an interview with George Mira. What no one at ABC Sports knew at that moment was that I had had a University of Miami season ticket all through George Mira's undergraduate career at the University of Miami. I had watched all of his home games in the Orange Bowl. I still had, in Chapel Hill at that moment, a number 10 George Mira jersey in my closet. And when I got a call,
you won the lottery, but
exactly, I won the lottery. It was the most random, fortunate thing that could ever happen to anybody. And I was with friends at a beach house in eastern North Carolina when Dick Ebersol called me to say, we've run into a logjam. And this is August 8, 1974. The season begins in less than a month. And he calls me and says, we've run into a logjam. We've run into an obstacle here trying to choose the product of the talent hunt. And Roone has mentioned that he might like to have a look at you. And I said, Dick, I got this out of my mind months ago. I came to New York for interviews with other jobs. I'm supposed to go to work in program planning on September 15 with John Martin and Jim Spence. I'm not really interested in your gimmick sideline thing in college football anymore. I don't want to go to Birmingham again. And he said, I don't think you listened to me carefully. I don't think you heard what I said.
Roone was the god at ABC
exactly.
Sports.
Roone was beyond a god. Roone was unapproachable. He was the top of Mount Olympus, not just at ABC, but his reputation in general in the business.
Now, for context, Peter Sarsgaard played him in the...
Peter Sarsgaard played him in the November 5 movie. Yes, he did.
Yeah.
And I can honestly say I haven't seen the movie. So
it's good.
I can't wait to see Sarsgaard's portrayal of Roone.
But he had become a legend after the Munich Olympics.
He was a legend before the Munich Olympics.
Yeah.
Because of Wide World of Sports, because of the AFL, because of the whole approach to sports that was different from the other networks, because there were many more hours of sports programming on ABC than on CBS and NBC at that time. Because, among other things, not just the Olympics, Wide World of Sports, there was a program called The American Sportsman, which was a fishing and hunting thing, where Kurt Gowdy would go out and get his boots wet in the river and stuff like that. So Roone was a huge programming force. He had started, by the way, as the head of children's programming at NBC.
No kidding.
Yeah, and another element of the whole aura, Roone was at that time creating a phenomenon called Howard Cosell.
Right.
How did Roone discover Cosell? When he was the head of children's programming at NBC, he would ride a limousine in from Scarsdale to the city, to 7 West 66th Street, to 30 Rockefeller Center, I should say, to govern NBC children's programming on Saturday mornings. And he would listen to a Little League Baseball radio show that Cosell did in Scarsdale.
Out of Westchester.
Out of Westchester County.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And so Roone hears this voice doing Little League Baseball on the radio, and he's coming in.
Little
He says,
Timmy Stevens.
This is little Stevie Shepla.
What you don't know about this kid is this.
Exactly right. You are doing a brilliant imitation of what Howard would have sounded like doing Little League Baseball, and he did. So at any rate, the bottom line was Roone was...
When they say Roone wants you, you go to Birmingham
100%.
again.
And plus, they want me to interview George Mira. So I hung up the phone. The people who were at the beach house with me, and heaven only knows, I still don't know to this day how Ebersol got the number for a wall phone in a rented house that was rented on under somebody else's name. And when I hung up the phone, everybody's looking at me. The three people in the room are looking at me. So what's up? And I said to them, they had not heard the other side of the conversation. I said to them, I'm going to be the college-age reporter. They said, how do you know that? Did he just tell you you're going to be the college-age reporter? I said, no. The universe has decided. This is already clear. I mean, I don't even have to go do the interview, really. In my own mind, I know what's going to happen. And sure enough, we sent the film, and Roone said, oh, my gosh, how did he do all this background information and stuff like that?
So you talk about the University of Miami. Miami is a very important part of your youth, but you're a North Carolina native. How did you get to Miami?
Well, I was born in Hendersonville, North Carolina. My mother was... she was already the widow of her first husband, a World War II bomber pilot who had died when the transport plane bringing him back from Saipan at the end of the war crashed into a mountain in Brevard, North Carolina, 18 miles away from where his very good friend and Bomber Squadron wingmate, Jim Lampley, was already home in his mother's house. The legend in my family is that my father went to the kitchen for breakfast that morning, and his mother, eventually my grandmother, Mildred Askew Lampley, said to him, Jim, there's a radio report of a transport plane crashing in Brevard, crashing into Cold Mountain in Brevard, and according to the legend, my father says that's Fred Trickey's plane. Reality is that he could never have known on what transport plane his friend was coming back. That's fiction that my grandmother made up, but my grandmother was such a compelling storyteller that people don't push back or didn't push back at that time against the fiction. What is true is that my father took a uniform and some medals to Tampa, to McDill Field in Tampa, so that my mother, his friend's widow, would have something to bury. And they began to see each other. And over the next 3 years, they saw more and more of each other, and eventually they got married. And she came to live in Hendersonville, and I was born in Hendersonville, North Carolina in 1949, and grew up there until I was 10 or 11 years old. And at that point, my mother... The Air Force pension money and things of that nature were running out. My brother was in an Episcopal prep school in Western North Carolina. My mother was getting more and more distressed about finance and stuff like that. And needed to make a living, needed to find a way to make a living. Chose to learn how to sell life insurance and chose to go do it in South Florida because there were a concentration of military bases in South Florida. She had lived on military bases. She had spent all of World War II on Air Force bases waiting for her first husband to return. And so she thought that she knew the life of those people, understood the life of people, and could sell insurance to them. And so she went to Miami, and I wound up being the one who went to Miami with her, where we lived year after year in a series of crappy tract houses in southwest Miami.
Because your father had passed away.
My father died of cancer in 1954. So I was 5 when my father died, and that sets up a meaningful transition because I was 6 in 1955 when my mother took me into a room at a friend's house and sat me down in front of a TV dinner tray with a tiny TV on it and said, sit here, you're going to watch the Friday night fights with Sugar Ray Robinson against Bobo Olson for the middleweight championship of the world. I'm telling you to watch this fight A, because if your father was still alive, this is where he'd be and what he'd be doing. And B, because Sugar Ray Robinson is my favorite fighter. He dances while he fights. So sit here and watch this. And in the next 90 minutes, a man named Don Dunphy is going to teach you everything you need to know about boxing. So that was the beginning of my genesis into boxing in 1955. And then by the time we moved to Miami in 1960-61, there's boxing in Miami.
Yeah.
There's a famous
there's a pretty important bout that you went to see, the Clay Liston bout.
I saved in 1964. I saved lawn mowing and car washing money for months.
Why were you so obsessed with Cassius Clay?
I was obsessed with Cassius Clay because I saw him at the Rome Olympics in 1960, where he was pursuing the middleweight gold medal, which he won, and. As I said, the first fighter my mother made me watch was Sugar Ray Robinson. Well, the heavyweight evocation of Robinson's balletic, dancing, graceful style in the ring was Cassius Clay. And, of course, he was spouting all of this self-styled rhetoric, largely about race relations and about racial equality and things of that nature. And my mother had already schooled me and was teaching me that that was the most important value, that there was no other important social value that was more meaningful to me as a Southern white boy than that I didn't follow the path of my relatives in both her family and my father's family, none of whom knew how to properly pronounce the word Negro. I was the one who was going to learn how to properly pronounce that word and how to understand that these people, regardless of skin color, were our equals and needed our respect. And Cassius Clay was like a gift from the universe to me. He gave me a hero, an idol, someone to look up to and affiliate with. So when I read in late 1963 that if Clay were to fight Sonny Liston for the heavyweight championship, and he was unbeaten and coming up and headed toward that if Clay were to fight Sonny Liston for the heavyweight championship, that fight would probably take place in Miami Beach. That's when I began washing cars and mowing lawns in my crappy tract house rented community in South Miami and saving to buy a ticket for the fight.
And you're 14 when your mom dropped you off to go see the fight?
Yes. My 15th birthday would have been a month and a half later.
So your retelling of that evening is as clear an example of the exhilaration that only sports can provide as anything I can remember. And it's this innocence and optimism and, like I use the word again, exhilaration that you experience. Just share a little bit about that experience, if you would.
Well, first of all, some people have difficulty believing that I remember everything that I remembered.
Well, you did a good job remembering it the right way, right?
I tried.
Yeah.
And the reason I tried is because instinctively, at age 5, when my father died, I remember coming to the conclusion that you had to remember everything. It was very important to remember everything because if you didn't, you lost it. Mm-hmm. And didn't want to lose him, didn't want to lose anything else. So I actually went through exercises. I set about, doing things that would help me to train my memory to try to remember everything. My wife will tell you, my current wife, Deborah, will tell you that I remember the people who were in my 5th grade classroom and the order in which they sat. And I lay awake at night in bed and went through all those things and trained myself because I didn't want to lose anything. And so, yeah, I remember all the details leading up to February 25, 1964 in the Miami Beach Convention Center, and I recite them in the book. My mother dropping me off, my mother telling me what to do when the fight is over, and my exhilaration that Clay won the fight and became the heavyweight championship of the world, and then going back to our Southwest Miami neighborhood and climbing up on the roof of the house at by the way, 9760 Sunset Drive, and shouting all of his, boastful speech at the top of my lungs until my mother came out and said, "Get down from there. You're going to get us arrested," etc. And, it was an experience never to be forgotten. Even a normal person, and I don't think I'm a normal person, but even a normal person would have wanted to remember every detail of that particular experience.
Do you think your facility with details, that learned facility, the practice facility, is a reason you became so able in the broadcasting booth, because you had this ability to grasp at memories and historical facts in sports that others wouldn't be able to process and put together?
Or to memorize a 2-minute on-camera soliloquy for the top of the show, or to memorize all the statistical information that I needed to know relative to the teams or players who are going to play against each other. It was hugely important to me in my development as a sports commentator, and particularly given that at the beginning I was 25 years old in a business dominated by 45 and 55-year-old men. It gave me a level of credibility that I would not otherwise have had, and that was very meaningful to me.
So they saw you, and even though there's a very defined hierarchy and we'll go back to ABC Sports now. There's a defined hierarchy at ABC Sports with people like Jim McKay and Keith Jackson and Howard Cosell
and Chris Schenkel and various others,
big time guys, right?
Yeah.
So you're an upstart.
They're all wearing yellow blazers,
right?
And now I'm
Not
wearing
gold,
a yellow blazer
right?
too.
Yeah. So you're in the fold, and there's like, okay, he's one of us, but you've got to earn your keep. But they couldn't deny that you had something special.
So how did I do that?
Well, in a very short period of time, you're on your way at this institution through no shortage of hard work and willingness to take whatever they threw your way.
All the guys you just mentioned, and some of them in some ways mentored me.
Others did not.
Others kept me as far at arm's length as possible. But they all showed me something in their way. And even if they at first found me a reprehensible presence who was, bound to be a thorn in their side, ultimately they recognized that they had all paid a certain kind of price on the way up, which was to do all of the wacky wide world of sports events that were to some degree the bread and butter of weekend wide world of sports programming on ABC.
This is pre-ESPN or before?
This is before any cable TV whatsoever.
Yep.
There are only 3 television networks. Mm-hmm. NBC and CBS at the very beginning don't have anything even remotely approaching Wide World of Sports with its broad variety of sports exposures. Wide World has the wrist wrestling, the lumberjacks, the motorcycles on ice, the New York State Firemen's Competition. All of these gimmick events. Oriental World of Self-Defense was the first one I did here at Madison Square Garden in New York. And the point that I'm about to make there is that every one of those legendary guys, including McKay, had done all of those events 4, 5, 6 times, right? They had to go back to Petaluma, California, or Hayward, Wisconsin, or Central Islip, New York, many times. Now, here I was. I was the new guinea pig. I had to do all of those events every year for a while. And I spent 4 or 5 years going to every one of those places over and over, and I relieved them of that particular responsibility. So I went, in a very short period of time, I went from being a total pariah, get him out of here, to, the kid is great. He prevents us from having to go do all of this stuff that we have done for years in our own apprenticeships on the way to being Hall of Fame broadcasting legends.
So you have a quote from Jack Nicholson later in the book, much later in the book, who told you there's no small parts, only small actors.
Yes.
You're embracing that role before he ever tells you that.
Oh, I didn't embrace it. I was fractious. Okay,
but you went and you did
I had to go,
and you gave it your best.
It's between doing that and going to some local station somewhere and starting the normal apprenticeship of finding my way up from being the number 2 sportscaster, the reporter, as it were, on the 6 and 11 o'clock news, and then hoping that I can find my way up the ladder. I bypassed that. Okay, I went way past the station process. I was 25 years old and I was chosen to be on the network, and I was given a yellow blazer. That had never happened to anybody and wasn't supposed to happen to me, but it did. And so now now that I had this niche, I had to hold on to that niche. I would be crazy not to. And oh, by the way, just to fill out the picture, I'm flying first class. I'm staying in the best possible hotels. I'm meeting the chief organizers of the NCAA and eventually the NFL, et cetera, because of the position that I'm in. I'm going to dinner or drinks here in New York along 3rd Avenue or 1st Avenue with all of the other, quote, stars of my business. And so I'm going to the Emmys. I'm going to the College Football Foundation Hall of Fame dinner at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. I'm having experiences that no other novice had ever had. Right. And eventually there were others who had these kinds of things, but I was the first.
So eventually, as you say, you're on your way. You're going to Studio 54, and you can sit at Warhol's table. That's a pretty good table to sit at.
I can sit at Warhol's table, and another person who can sit there is a guy named Donald Trump.
Yeah. Mick Jagger.
Who I am told is a real estate developer. I don't even know what that is. Mick Jagger, I go to parties at his Central Park West apartment. I go with him to Ahmet Erdogan's 60th birthday party in Montreal at the Olympics. I'm hanging out in the kitchen with Bianca. You know, all these things were part and parcel of that life. And, you know, did I pinch myself? Oh, hell yes. I pinched myself over and over.
So it seems to me that ego is absolutely necessary to have if you want to be on camera, and confidence, but it's also your nemesis as the world starts telling you you're great. How do you manage this deserved but dangerous attention?
Well, managing my ego was a struggle from the moment that the Henderson County School Board in Hendersonville, North Carolina, dictated that I had to skip the 4th grade. So once I skipped the 4th grade in Hendersonville.
You thought you were hot shit.
Huh?
You thought you were hot shit in Hendersonville?
Yeah, that's right. And now I'm kind of a social outcast in every classroom I'm ever in, young. From there all the way through the end of high school, because I'm 1 year younger than everybody else.
I see.
I mean, I go through Southwest Miami High School, a 3,000 person motorcycle high school in South Miami, and I'm the one who is 14 when everybody else is 15, and I'm 15 when everybody else is 16, and I memorize the telephone numbers of the top 3 or 4 most beautiful girls in my class, and I look at the phone at night thinking that eventually I'm going to pick up the phone and dial one of those numbers, but I never do because I'm 1 year younger than them, and therefore scared of that. I wind up taking a sophomore girl to the senior prom because she's the only one I feel secure asking out. Ego management was a struggle all the way until I got to Chapel Hill. Once I was a freshman in Chapel Hill, as a 17-year-old freshman in Chapel Hill, that was enough of a reversal that now I had cachet. Okay, now I'm an interesting and intriguing element here. And I'm not a pariah because I'm not 18. I'm an attraction because I'm only 17 and I'm already on a college campus. That was a dramatic reversal in my life. So my ego began to flourish once I came to college in Chapel Hill, and it was no longer a bat against my identity to be 1 year younger than everybody else. But the net result was I became a party animal, and I wound up basically flunking out of school.
Well, you redeemed yourself.
I did. I went to a dreadful, menial, depressing job working with VHA and FHA mortgage loan packages in a filing room in Miami for women between the ages of 62 and 65, 2,500 feet of filing cabinets and me. And for 13 months, I sat there and went through all these documents and made sure that the T's were crossed and the I's were dotted and the signatures appeared in the right place. It was mind-numbing work, and it was mind-numbing enough that it inculcated into me a recognition that I needed to go back to Chapel Hill. I needed to find a way to get back into school. I needed to quit standing in a bar and drinking beer from 2 o'clock in the afternoon until midnight, and I needed to do the actual work and graduate from college, which I did. I went from a 1.44 academic average to a 4.0 in the last 2.5 years of my college work.
But the point I'm trying to get to is that it seems like in all of entertainment, that you have to keep pushing and yet take the job that's presented to you. And with all the ups and downs in your career, you've been in some incredible places, and you've done the job that they asked you to do, which generally led to the next bigger thing. But it's also put you in some of the most interesting, the most interesting sporting events of my entire life, because you've been on the air since I was 5, right? And one of them was the Miracle on Ice, which, anybody who was alive in America and pulling for America at the time remembers where they were when that went down. I
think that's true.
Where were you?
So
against for the Russian game. Game.
So my first Olympics are the Innsbruck Olympics in winter of '76. And then I go to the Montreal Olympics in summer of '76. And both of those places, I am a sports feature reporter. And then over the next few years, I begin to build my dossier, and I'm getting a little bit more credibility, and I'm seen within the department as somebody who can handle serious subjects. And I actually do some work for the news division. And by the time we get to Lake Placid in 1980, Lake Placid, away from competition, has an overwhelmingly meaningful context relative to the entire world of sports, and particularly the Olympics, because there are Soviet tanks in Afghanistan. The Carter administration is trying to push back against the Soviet tanks in Afghanistan, and by the time we arrive in tiny Lake Placid for
February
the Olympic Games,
February
1980, a very snowy February of 1980. And by the time we get there, there's an active, ongoing question as to whether the United States is going to boycott the 1980 Summer Games in Moscow. And there's an International Olympic Committee delegates meeting in Lake Placid, and there are other organizational activities going on which bear directly on whether this is going to take place. And I become, because of the representation by a producer named Terry O'Neill, that I was the person to do it, I become the reporter for that whole subject, along with the associated subject of the near collapse of the organizational factors in Lake Placid, where eventually you have entire parking lots with 1,500 people standing around holding tickets for events, and buses never show up to take them to those events because of tremendous snafus in the transportation program. So both of these are big, nightly, ongoing stories at those Olympics, and those become the things that I do.
Right.
Until on the second Friday night, or Friday afternoon as it was.
In a school, I forgot, it was the actual high school arena.
It was the high school arena.
That's
and
crazy.
The production facility, the basic production facility was 250 yards through the snow from the high school arena. And I mean, when you talk about snow in Lake Placid, that's snow, all right? That's February snow. That is big-time stuff. So I'm in that production facility with a producer and a tape editor, putting together a feature piece for the primetime show that's going to air on the closing Sunday about all of these organizational and political activities surrounding the potential for the boycott and the organizational snafus in Lake Placid. And we're cutting tape, and as we do so, we have a tiny monitor, no bigger than that. And that tiny monitor is above the monitor where we're doing our editing. And on that monitor is the United States versus Soviet Union semifinal hockey game.
Which everybody thought was going to be a blowout.
It's not actually called a semifinal, but in reality, that's what it's working out to be. Mm-hmm. And oh yes, well, Why would it be a blowout? The Soviet Union had not lost an international hockey game in more than 10 years. The Soviet Union had won the gold medal in the preceding 4 Olympics. Soviet Union had played this same ragtag, largely amateur American team in an exhibition game in Madison Square Garden a few days before the opening ceremony of the Olympics. Final score was 10-3. A lot of hockey writers said it could have been 20-3. So there was absolutely no plausible reason to expect that the United States could even be competitive in the game, much less win it. That would be insane. And as we're cutting this feature piece, and the hockey game is on the tiny monitor up above the main monitor, we're watching as at the end of the first period, a very small American player named Mark Johnson, who was for 2 weeks the hottest goal scorer in the world, chased a loose puck in the Russian zone, got to the puck, slid it under Vladislav Tretiak's glove. Vladislav Tretiak, the greatest goalie in the world, he had shut down a team of Canadian National Hockey League All-Stars in Canada the year before, and when Johnson slid that puck under his glove, that made the score 2-1 USA after the first period. And at that time, there was in every ABC production facility a red phone, and the red phone had a light on top. And if the light went on, you understood that that was Roone, because the only purpose of the phone was Roone, and that was the Roone phone. And I had been at ABC 6 years. I had never seen a Roone phone ring. And within seconds after Johnson scored that goal, the light went on. And I looked around the room, and the producer looked at me, and the editor looked at me, and they both had this look like, all yours. It's got to be for you. It isn't for us. And I picked up the phone and I said, hello. And I recognized his voice. And he said, I'm looking for Jim Lampley. And I said, Roone, it's me. I'm here. What are you doing? I described to him what I was doing. He said, okay, drop that. You can come back to that. That's for Sunday. You don't need to finish that right now. Go to the hockey arena. Get in. Find a place where you can watch the game, and then be ready at the end of the game to gather an interview for us to fill the last 7 minutes on the primetime show. We've already got it blocked into the format. If you can get an interview to fill those minutes, then that will be our most important asset tonight. And I understood what he was saying. And the last thing I said was, Roone, I don't have the right credential to get into hockey. Now, we're only 8 years after Munich. Trying to get into an Olympic event without the right credential was, like trying to climb the base of Mount Everest without any cleats or talons. So I said to him, Roone, I don't have the right credential. And he said, you'll get in, and hung up the phone. So I walked through the snow. I got to the door of the high school hockey arena. By the way, 8,500-seat high school hockey arena.
Big high school arena.
Lake Placid is an unusual place.
Yeah.
And I got there, and the first face I saw at the door was the high school hockey coach who was the manager of the venue. I had met him a few days before by sheer accident. He recognized me. I explained the problem. He said, come on in. And I went up to the main camera platform about 40 feet behind where Al Michaels and Ken Dryden were calling the game. I noticed that there was another figure on the camera platform whom I didn't recognize at first, and I knew that that was another person who wasn't supposed to be there. We both had to pledge to the camera operators that we would be still, totally still, because it might interfere with their shots if we didn't. Eventually, as we're watching the second period progress, my mind is working. I realize, this guy in the dark peacoat next to me is Harry Chapin. He did a concert in the Olympic Village the night before.
Cats in the Cradle.
And so Harry Chapin and I stood together and watched the remainder of the second period and the third period of the Miracle on Ice. We never exchanged names. We never actually said hello to each other. We did hug each other twice. We hugged each other on the goal that tied the game at 3-3, and we hugged each other when Mike Eruzione scored what is now the most famous goal in the history of American hockey a few minutes later.
Yeah.
And we watched the closing minutes of arguably the biggest and most dramatic upset in the history of Olympic sports, maybe even in American sports. And then I had to go find an interview. Right. So I never said hello to Harry Chapin, never exchanged any identity. 2 hugs, 2 times jumping up and down, both times the cameraman turning around to us. Damn it, you said you wouldn't move. And then I ran down to, I knew how to get to the tunnel outside the United States dressing room, and I waited, or locker room, whatever you want to call it, and I waited for players to come out. And I watched the players come out, one right after another, and I recognized several of them, and I yelled their names, but I was on one end. They were headed toward the other end, and I didn't get anybody's attention. And the last player to come out was Eruzione, and we had the same agent, and I had met him just a few days before, and he recognized my voice. And I wound up taking a camera and standing outside of a small Italian restaurant in Lake Placid on Main Street while he and Jimmy Craig and Jimmy's dad.
Jim went to the Atlanta Flames after that.
Jimmy was.
I saw
him the
play.
goalie who had a representative career in the NHL.
Yep.
Mike did not have an NHL career because Mike was Mike. But they were the stars of the night. You know, Jimmy, as I say in the book, Jimmy stood on his head like no goalie ever has. The fabulous statistic is that the Russians scored 3 goals on 39 shots. The Americans scored 4 goals on 12 shots.
Incredible.
So couldn't happen, did happen. Miracle on ice.
Right. You've got hours worth of anecdotes that we could talk about, but I know
I'm taking up more time.
No, this is fantastic. I love it. One of the things I think about your career, and a lot of people, young people, think, well, I'm going to get out of college and my career is going to go in one straight line up and to the right. There won't be any interruptions or setbacks or things like that. I'm sure if you asked somebody my age, they said, well, Jim Lampley, like, oh, the guy's always been successful, but you have had ups and downs. You ran into corporate nemeses along the way.
Oh, yeah.
And you had a great agent who helped you keep things in perspective.
Yes, exactly.
And when somebody at ABC, you were the golden boy at ABC, they promised you the world, corporate shifts come around, and all of a sudden you're out.
Roone Arledge went from president of sports to eventually president of news and sports, and then eventually to just president of news. And when a new sports president arrived from the owned stations division, that was a person who came in with one basic perspective about the sports division, and that perspective was, who is Jim Lampley and how do I get rid of him? And why does he have this lucrative contract? Why are we paying him all this money? I want to get him out of here. And he made that very clear to the beloved agent that you referred to, Arthur Kaminsky. Art Kaminsky. And Art Kaminsky was a savior, a protector, a tremendous force in my career, as he was in some other careers as well. But yeah,
But he kept you from doing damage to yourself by blowing yourself.
He did the best he could to keep me from doing damage to myself. I was so thrown off by the whole notion that after this golden upward arc, somebody would want to get rid of me. 1984, I host the Super Bowl, and I'm the late night host of the Sarajevo games in association with a woman named Kathleen Sullivan. I'm the late night host of the Los Angeles games along with Donna De Verona. I call every swimming event in Los Angeles. I have a stunning 1984. From there, I become the race caller at the Indianapolis 500. I called the Indianapolis 500 in 1986. And by 1987, Dennis Swanson has become the president of sports, and all he wants is to get rid of me, to obliterate my contract, to wipe me out. And eventually he did. And I had to leave. But the first thing he did to try to force me to get out, to make clear how disapproved of I was, he assigned me to boxing. He had no idea that I had. He had no idea that I had any interest
I'll
in
show
boxing.
you, Lampley.
Yeah, exactly. And no idea I had any interest in boxing. No idea that I had any aptitude toward it whatsoever. Didn't know the story of me going to Cassius Clay versus Sonny Liston in 1964. And he assigned me to boxing, and he also seems, looking back, that he was unaware that the sports division, the people under him, had just signed a get-acquainted, look-see contract with a 19-year-old heavyweight from upstate New York.
What was his name? I can't remember.
His name was Mike Tyson.
Oh, I heard
and
he's
the
good.
very
I heard
first
he's
fight
good.
I ever called on television was Mike Tyson versus Jesse Ferguson, which was Tyson's first experience on network television. So at the very beginning, I became associated with Tyson's arc. And the net result of that was when I was forced out of ABC Sports and I wound up going to Los Angeles to work for CBS, I took with me this boxing identity, and I got a visit from the two chief executives of HBO, and suddenly I had a contract with HBO to call their boxing and their tennis, by the way, which was
pretty nice gig.
Weekday at Wimbledon.
Yeah. So a lesson here on the happiness theme, on the understanding your role in your career, is that you rolled with it. You adopted there's no small roles, just small.
What Nicholson would eventually teach
what he
me.
would tell you, and you just gave it your all. And then there's also whenever God closes a door, he opens a window thing. And he closed a pretty big door, but he opened multiple other windows, and your career developed in a way you hadn't anticipated, and probably made you more famous. Well, at least as famous and successful as you would have been if you stayed at ABC.
Another graphic and unforgettable lesson, and you know this, my agent, Art Kaminsky, when I was flabbergasted, depressed, self-destructive, down on my luck, gone, et cetera, and Kaminsky said to me, Jim, Dennis Swanson didn't take your talent. He just took your job. Your talent you get to take with you everywhere you go. And that was hugely important. That was the first life raft that saved me in my career.
Mm-hmm.
Later, 9 years later, Nicholson provided the other life raft. But on both occasions when I thought I was done, important people stepped in and told me.
Art also told you the public doesn't know what ABC promised you. So he's like, stick with it, be you. The public knows you. They don't know.
When Swanson wiped me out of ABC Sports, he wiped out what were tremendously significant promises that were written into my contract. And that was part of why he needed to get rid of me, was because I had things written into my contract that he did not want to happen. So he obliterated all that.
Yeah.
And I at one point was saying, Art, this is in the contract. We just stay and ride it out. And he said, no, Jim, it doesn't work that way. He is now the division boss, and he doesn't really care what's in your contract. So, I learned some things along the way. I grew up, I had to. And I got through it. Yeah.
I want to, again, I appreciate you coming in, and I could talk to you for hours about this stuff because the anecdotes are so great, but I know you've got a life to live. I want to ask you about a few different people. Maybe you just offer me.
No, I don't have a life to live. We're living it right now.
Good.
Okay?
No, that is the point. This is life. We're right here, right now. What was different about Tyson? Go back and tell me. Obviously, he was a force we had never seen before, but what lessons do you take from the career of Mike Tyson?
Well, the first thing about Mike that's really important is don't let the surface delude you into believing that you know who this person is, okay? Mike had a persona that was built for him by two managers, Bill Caton and Jimmy Jacobs, by his trainer Customato. It was a customized version of a heavyweight destroyer. He had been taught a language boxing is a hurt business. Everybody's got a plan until you hit them, et cetera, all of which made him seem like this ultra intimidating force. Caton and Jacobs were tremendous matchmakers, particularly Jimmy, who figured out exactly the people that he could annihilate on his way up. They put together a highlight reel of all of his early knockouts. It was comical. He was knocking guys through the air, cartwheels and stuff like that. At that time, we were still in the stations era. Every local television station in the country had a nightly newscast at 11 o'clock. Every local sports director in the country had to be able to provide 3.5 minutes, maybe 4.5 minutes of programming for that show. It wasn't always easy for them to do. So to have a 1:40 highlight reel of this 19-year-old kid whom people hadn't seen before, who is making boxing look like this cosmic kaleidoscope of destruction and fireworks, was a tremendous boon to all these local sportscasters. And every nighttime news viewer in the country saw Mike Tyson before he ever had to fight anybody of significance. And so, this reputation was pre-constructed. I go into a room with Mike before the first fight that I ever covered, and I'm like, wow, this kid is sweet. He's gentle. He's shy and retiring in a way. There's nothing here that matches with the persona that I saw on that videotape. And so that was step one in understanding the complexity of Mike Tyson. And Mike Tyson, ultimately, I think people now understand, he becomes one of the most complex and confusing public figures of late 20th century on into early 21st century life in America. And a lot of people clung almost romantically to the notion that he was this cosmic destroyer who was going to annihilate every heavyweight that he fought. They overlooked the fact that he was 5'10", that at his best he weighed about 216 or 217.
Hell, I weigh 260.
When he got ready to fight Lennox Lewis, 6'5", 230, et cetera, a lot of people thought, this Mike Tyson, he'll annihilate Lennox Lewis. If you were deep into the boxing culture, by that point you realized, this is written in advance, and Mike knew that it was written in advance. Nobody, ultimately, not at the beginning, I don't think, but ultimately, after the Robin Givens of it all, after Jimmy Jacobs died, after he left Customato, after all of the other changes in his life, ultimately, nobody knew Mike better than Mike. But that was not what was projected to the public.
Should Mike have done the Jake Paul fight?
Well, why not? If the world is going to pay you extraordinary sums of money to do something that is on its face absurd, why not? We live in the world of, I'm not a fan of social media, but I know that I'm not going to be able to wipe them off the face of the planet. I realize that social media are, at least for the time being, here to stay. And there are certain things that go on in our society now which are purely the product of the fictions that are created by social media.
100%.
Jake Paul against Mike Tyson, the notion that a 58-year-old man can go in and be the same as he was when he was 19, that's absurd, obviously. But, he got paid a lot of money, and I'm very happy for him.
All right, I'm going to throw a few names out at you. I just want to get a few words on each of them. Magic Johnson.
Great man. Genuinely great man. Wonderful, loving, warm personality. I always point out and said, if you went to the Laker locker room after a game and you needed a particular interview, a particular piece of feedback, Magic greeted you at the door and he took you to where you needed to go. Even if you had to talk to Kareem, which was not always an easy thing to do, Magic could set that up for you. He was enormously giving, helpful, generous to reporters. I've never known an athlete who was better at that. The other one who shared that identity is a Yankee whom we might get to at some point. But
let's go ahead. Reggie Jackson.
I love Magic with passion.
We'll roll right into Reggie Jackson then.
Same thing. if you had to go to the Yankee locker room in the late 70s, early 80s, and that could be a very intimidating experience.
I bet.
There were people in there whom you did not want to ask for feedback, particularly after a loss. Greg Nettles was always a problem. Thurman Munson was always a problem. But Reggie was there. And if you needed help, 44 would help you. I loved him, and I still love him to this day.
Howard Cosell.
A troubled individual, a very unhappy man, brilliant in his way, but
Why was he brilliant? Like, are those two things related?
well, how many highly trained NYU educated lawyers become television sports commentators? Not many. And he had certain capacities like memorization and being able to do something within a time framework and control it so that he was always going to hit the mark in terms of time. Remember the NFL Monday Night Highlights with Howard doing the highlights? And he would at some points go very fast. Here he is running through the line, gets a 17-yard gain of center, and then at some point he would slow it down and bring it back to a different cadence. He was watching a clock on the wall, and he was managing time so that he would get to the end of this exactly within the time frame that he knew was available. And his vehicle for doing that was the speeding up and slowing down, which created an internal drama within the narration itself. You didn't understand why you were being led along by this internal drama. It just felt like Cosell being Cosell. But he was doing this thing that he could do, uniquely talented in managing time.
Arthur Ashe.
One of the greatest human beings of all time. And from my experience with Arthur, shoulder to shoulder at Wimbledon and the hours that I worked with him in the HBO booth, doing 5-hour, later 6-hour telecasts, no commercials. Sometimes when it rained, no commercials, no tennis. Arthur was an astonishing friend, an astonishingly meaningful human being in terms of his constant orientation to his subject, which was equality, race relations, statesmanship, etc. A wonderful, wonderful friend. I miss him every day. And what a privilege it was to have him for a while in my life.
Billie Jean King.
Same thing. And just an amazing woman in terms of her generosity of spirit, her outer directedness, her ability to contribute to your life no matter who you were and what you were doing, the level of empathy that she was able to show in learning about everybody. I mean, she became like a sister to me. And I, I would honestly say at this moment in my life, not having spoken to Billie Jean in years, if I needed advice tomorrow on some subject that's deeply personal and goes directly to my heart and soul, she's on an extremely short list because of her wisdom. I will never, ever go a day without thinking of one thing that she said over and over. Jim, the only ball that matters in your life is the next one coming over the net. The last one didn't matter. The next one after this one doesn't matter. This ball is what your life is about right now. Mm-hmm. That's such a lesson, and so many people forget it, and that's Billie Jean.
So
you're cracking me up here. You're talking about people whom I love so deeply that it's difficult for me to...
Well, I want to ask you about a more controversial one, which you recount in the book. When did it dawn on you that O.J. probably did it?
First of all, I loved O.J. Okay, we were very close friends, and
you guys ran around for a long time.
He was part of a lot of positive experiences in my life. I left on Wednesday of that week to fly to London for Wimbledon. I arrived very, very late Wednesday night in London. I went out to rehearsals at Wimbledon on Thursday and Friday. And I got back to the hotel room on Friday, and I clicked on CNN just to see what was going on. And I saw the Bronco going down the 405. And I I saw the scene that, Al Cowlings was driving the Bronco and OJ was in the back. And at that moment, it was abundantly clear. How could it have been any other way? So that was devastating. I remember.
What'd you think?
I was standing when I saw it. I was standing when I saw the camera shot of the Bronco going down the 405. I knew the car. I had ridden in that Bronco. And when it dawned on me, I lost my strength and my bearings. I collapsed back onto the sofa. Thank heaven the sofa was behind me. I sat there for hours just devastated with the knowledge of that reality and the implications of it for my life. I mean, this is a person that I used to travel back and forth to New York with on the plane when we were doing NFL Live together. This is a person that I partied with and played golf with and danced with and had wonderful, wonderful times in L.A. And I always say this, I can't talk about him without making this point. At that moment in Hollywood, if you knew a lot of big stars and public figures, the one who remembered your birthday, remembered your anniversary, remembered the birth of your daughter, the one who understood what was important in your life was OJ. He had stock in two companies that I remember, Miss Grace's Lemon Cake and Honey Baked Hams. On the meaningful occasions in your life, not just Christmas, other times during the year, you would get a Miss Grace's Lemon Cake and a Honey Baked Ham and a little card from OJ. He was unfailingly generous, unfailingly thoughtful, unfailingly friendly, modest as someone like that could possibly be in a town where he was uniquely a god.
Adulated.
Los Angeles is in a lot of ways built around the University of Southern California. UCLA is the larger and globally more meaningful university, but the town is run by SC people. So the fact that OJ was a Heisman Trophy winner from USC, he could not fail in that town. He was not going to be allowed to. And it was a beautiful thing to watch because in our view, his friends, he deserved it until then.
All right, one more question about boxing and then one more personal reflection, and I'll let you go. From my buddy Charlie Lee, assuming he has his facts right here, to what would you attribute the fall in popularity of boxing compared to where it was 25 years ago? And is there a path to renew its cultural relevance?
It's a great question. Boxing is complex. I think that the violence factor is hard for some people to get around, although, of course, they embrace some other sports that are also violent and also create long-term damage and destruction. I think the notion that it is a sport for the lower social classes and that you're not going to see suburban white kids like Chris Everett and Jimmy Connors in a boxing ring, maybe that has something to do with it. And, I think that a lot of boxing matches, in fact, most boxing matches, don't produce some dramatic, glorious climax that you think you're looking for. Fight goes to a decision, whether it's a split decision or a unanimous decision. These are fine margins of competition. Somebody sitting there at ringside who's spent his whole life doing this is given the facility and the authority to make the judgment who won. Oftentimes, your naked eye as a layman says to you that that's not right, that it's something else. So there's an undercurrent of thought that it has to be criminal, it has to be fixed, et cetera, et cetera. Those of us who work in the sport know that that's not generally the case.
Right.
It just happens to be a sport with extremely fine margins of competition that is very technically difficult to judge. But in terms of the heart and soul of the competitors, in terms of who fighters are, if you get beyond the outer reaches and get close enough to know that, I mean, I'll give you my wife as a perfect example. She knew a little bit about boxing before she started coming to boxing matches. And I told her early on, don't fall in love with a fighter. because that ultimately leads to heartbreak and frustration. Okay, well, you can't go to as many fights as Deborah did without falling in love with fighters. And certainly she fell in love with more than one. And she experienced the heartbreak and frustration. But that's real life. No other sport so graphically replicates the emotional and intellectual context of real life as boxing. And the one that comes closest is tennis. Tennis is boxing with rackets. Tennis is the same thing in the sense that you are confronting your opponent. You look into his or her eyes. You are seeking tactical approaches and gambits that give you the edge at a given moment. That edge can go away in a heartbeat because of one good shot. All that replicates what goes on in a boxing match. So the athletes who are closest to boxing in terms of the mental experience are tennis players.
That's really interesting. One last question. What's the most important thing you learned from Muhammad Ali?
Humanity. That ultimately you are judged. You're judged by the content of your character. You are judged by the amount of love that you showed to other people. You know that Muhammad Ali spent hours one day babysitting my 8-year-old daughter. And, eventually she figured out who he was. She's now an extremely accomplished, high-level, very important person in the world that she chose. And there's no question that the hours she spent with him one day in her life contributed enormously to that process, to that ultimate life realization, et cetera. So I think there are a lot of things I learned from Ali, but I think that ultimately what I learned is that true greatness is the content of your character. Not how many fights did you win, not who did you knock out, not, how much money did you make, not were you the most famous man in the world, and he was, but the content of your character.
A guy who would sit out 3 years during the prime of his career.
To prove a point about justice, to make a point about justice, 100%.
Jim, thanks for the book. It's called It Happened, A Uniquely Lucky Life in Sports Television by my guest, Jim Lampley. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thanks so much.
My privilege. Thank you so much.